As you remember, when we left last time, we had just gotten done talking to Dave about a couple of different conversations, different topics there, Jamie. We've covered a lot in part one, and there was a lot of nuggets in there, so I'm hoping everybody had a chance to go back and listen to it again. If you haven't...
if you didn't catch part one, definitely go back and catch part one. But I will tell you, Dave became one of my favorite guests again. I think every guest we have becomes one of my favorites, but he's definitely top tier.
This isn't a we like one more than the other. I think every time we talk to someone, we're just like, okay, now you're on speed dial as pick a friend.
Right. Do you want to come back next week? This will be fun.
Exactly. I thought, there was, I'm going to say, just to do a little bit of recap, because as promised, although we haven't delivered yet, we have a mindset myth buster that we want to get to. But I will say, just to kind of look back over that part one episode, we dug in and I had a little bit of self-reflection come thrown at me. And I had to sit and pause kind of how trauma looks in my life, some things in the past that I've worked through or thought I worked through. Maybe I haven't as successfully as I would like to believe. We touched on a variety of different topics from, grief brain to, I think we ended the conversation before we started with dissociation, Jamie, which you kind of shared with a personal story from, your life, which was very powerful.
Yeah. It's good. I don't know. I know I'm steeped in the trauma topic constantly because of my work. And sometimes I forget that took a lot of years of training and being in this work to understand all of those things. So I'm glad to hear. I hope it's something that's helpful for other people too. You know what I mean? Because it's a big topic, and I think a lot of people experience it. And I think a lot of people experience it without even realizing that that's like being able to name it. You know what I mean?
I do. And for my understanding, a lot of this self-growth, I think, comes from being able to do some self-reflection, and even around the trauma. I mean, just to understand that there was trauma that took place, or even to be able to understand that sometimes you could have gone through a traumatic event and not even recognized it as trauma at the time. Even parts of that perspective that I had kind of shifted just a little bit. I still don't think I want to say it broke it, but it does bend it a little bit, which was really good, because I think it's more than I thought it was, but I also don't know if I buy into everything yet. But again, a little bit of self-reflection on my part goes a long way, I guess. And I think the people that, that listen to this conversation or have these types of conversations, I think they have that self-reflection that you need in order for that to be useful in your life, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
God, I didn't even do it on purpose.
I know. I know you didn't. That's what makes it funny, is that you're just like, this is me natural. Yeah.
If you hadn't said that, it would have right past me. I wouldn't have even,
right.
I wouldn't have even thought of it. Oh goodness. Anyway, for sure.
So let's get into our first recorded Mythbuster mindset Mythbuster. I think I'm going to mess that up all the time, because for some reason I want to put Mythbuster before mindset.
See, this is why we need to record some sort of mindset Mythbusters, and we can just play that instead of having to mess it up as we're getting used to a whole new, I don't know, do we call it a segment? So
I kind of like it as a segment. I kind of do. I think it's fun, at least. It's meant to be kind of punchy and lighthearted. But okay, today's mindset Mythbuster that I would like us to chat about is, I've heard this through my professional life, and it's leaked in through my personal life. And I think we've said, it's come up in our conversations even more frequently, and that is, perspective is your reality. Or I've heard it a couple different variations. I've heard it as perspective is reality. I've heard it as, I guess those are about the only two that I've actually heard it. Have you heard it said any differently?
No, I think that's probably the two. I think there's variations in that too. your perception is always your reality. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's
Right.
different degrees of like absolutism in that mindset.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important, when we hear that, I think a lot of people naturally go to, well, my perspective is reality, so that means it has to be your reality as well. And I think that's one of the biggest um, myth busters or myths that we have to bust with that is that everybody has their own perspective, and that is the reality to that individual, but that is not the reality of people outside of yourself.
Mhm.
In fact, they could have a very different reality based off of their own perspective. And to just assume that how you see the world is how everybody else sees the world is something that, we've been trying to talk through for what now, 2.5 years at this point. So it's like,
That's true. 2.5 years of talking. There's a lot about this topic that we could talk about, huh? Well, and I'm curious too, what is the difference between perception and perspective? Is there a difference in that? Because perception, that's how I've usually heard it. My perception is my reality, or your perception is your reality. Is that the same thing?
I'm actually going to do a quick
I was
little
going to say,
Google
I'm
search.
watching you Google it, so I'm just going to
Yeah.
pause here for a second.
So here's what Google, take it with a grain of salt, says. Perception is an individualized, immediate sensory interpretation of the world, influenced by personal experiences and biases while perspective is the broader point of view or mental framework through which someone understands information shaped by factors like culture, beliefs, and social position.
Hmm.
In essence, perception is how you experience something, whereas perspective is how you interpret and understand what you just experienced.
Interesting. So, yes, it's like the same highway, but different lanes.
Well, but even what that screams to me is it's still very personal to you, right? So how you we all have situations that happen and how you perceive them and how you shape them into your reality. That's still very personal that nobody else will have a front seat to other than you.
Right, right. I think the way that this has been useful, as far as a mythbuster goes, I think that perspectives and perceptions, well, perception is like an immediate response, right? It's like immediately what I assume has happened. Perspective is something with a distance. So I feel like my perspective can change fairly easily. My perception is not as easily changed. But I don't know that it's always reality. You know what I mean? As far as like,
I do.
because the perspective helps me reshape the interaction. You know what I'm saying? So I can have an interaction with a person that feels very negative, or their attitude toward me was negative or whatever, and then I take some space and my perspective of that has changed a little bit. Like, okay, I understand that this person that I was dealing with, their mom's in the hospital, whatever those things that I know about that person can help me reshape that and understand that it really wasn't about me. But that initial perspective or perception, it doesn't stay that way. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think while you were talking, I was kind of thinking through, well, could we have because, I'm all about rules, right? Like, hey, I need black and white. So one of the things that I would say is perspective shapes experience, not facts. And I would fall into that category because I experience something and I have a perspective on it that has to be true. And I think that's something, and that has to be a truth that's universal that everybody also knows and shares with me, right? And I think that could be one of the first myths that we bust is your perspective shapes your experience. It doesn't change facts, or it doesn't shape facts.
Well, and the other way that this mindset particularly has been helpful for me, not so much for myself. I think that I know I need to gather more information and understand another person's perspective in order to understand the interaction and things like that. Like, I know that for myself. But one thing that's important to me is that when I go into interactions, I think it's important for me to realize that a person's perception is their reality. And that way it helps me understand maybe how better to approach a situation, or to understand that person's reaction to a situation. For instance, if someone is coming to me and saying, "Hey, Jamie, you really hurt me when you did A, B, or C," and I know that that wasn't my intention, but to be able to hear that from another person, I feel like I need to be open to understanding that that was their perception of the situation. Does that make sense? So when I'm dealing with others, to understand that their perception may very well be their reality, and I need to accept that that's where they're coming from, has been helpful in dealing with people, I guess.
So, Jamie, what if we try to modify the saying instead of, my perspective is reality? What if we changed it and tried to apply some of the things that we've been talking, for a while now? And what if we said the more perspectives I seek out, the bigger my reality becomes?
Hmm.
Because thinking it like that, it would almost invite curiosity and listening, and gives room for growth, and it gives room to understand I know what I know, and the more perspectives that I consume, the bigger my reality can become. And I've kind of experienced that. I'm trying to, as I'm saying that out loud for the first time, I'm trying to go back in my mind, and that takes me back to my first college days, where I came from a very small town and I was pretty sheltered and I didn't have a lot of cultures. And I remember when I walked onto the college campus and my world exploded, and suddenly there was new people, and they looked different than me, and they acted differently than me, and they believed different things than I did, and they had different cultures and heritage and background. In a way, my perspective and my reality changed because I allowed those to come in, right? So
Mhm.
call it broadening your horizons, call it whatever you will, call it growing your reality, but allowing those different perspectives in, I think, is exactly what it did for me.
Mhm.
And that's kind of been a mantra for us, right? So what if you did start thinking of that differently and really started looking at it from that point of view, where you can say, the more perspectives that I let in, the bigger my reality can become.
Yeah. Well, and it doesn't even have to be like that, doesn't have to change your reality even. You know what I mean? Like what is right for me, and the way I move forward through the world is right for me. What's right for you is right for you. But the fact that there's possibilities that all of those can exist at the same time, I think that's the important key. That has been the important key of that, I guess, mindset myth. For me, is just to understand, like, your worldview is very different than mine, and yet here we both are. You know what I mean? We both can exist in the same space at the same time and take up the space that we deserve in that. You know what I'm saying?
I do. And
That sounds really
where,
metaphysical, and that wasn't how I was trying to go. But
whatever, just hold your crystals, Jamie.
I'm just
No,
gonna say, where's my patchouli oil? It's here
exactly.
somewhere.
No, but I think this conversation also goes right up to the line for me, because again, I do believe in fundamental truths that everybody, even if they deny them, are still truths. And I think this even myth, I think you have to take that into an account, right? Like, there is for some people, and I'm going to put myself in that category, there are things in this world that are just true. And that's based off of my upbringing. That's based off science. That's based off my religious beliefs. But those are fundamental truths that, even though that I'm talking to someone who may not see that, and that might not be part of their perspective or their reality, that does not change. And for me, that still applies to them, even if they can't see it. And I don't want that to open up a whole nother conversation, but I do think that there has to be an acknowledgement of that, because to me, there is a limit to where we can say exactly what you were saying, and even what I said. Like, I think bringing in different perspectives does grow your reality, and I think you can change it and kind of digest things. But for me, and I think for everybody, there are fundamental truths that reality is based off of that we can't ignore either, right? We can't expect that just because there's a different perspective that completely shatters what truth is, we can't now just adopt all of that and expect the other person to be like, oh, okay, their reality just grew and now they have, a bigger perspective and a more understanding. But I'll stop there because I think that's tiptoeing right into a conversation that probably would take us like 2 hours to
I was
just
going to say,
get to a
well,
point.
and this is a topic that we have kind of hit like a crossroads at a couple of different times because of that very thing. But I think, and I think the only thing that this myth that is sometimes true and sometimes not, I think, is where this is valuable is that in no way I can't expect you to accept my lived experience, the things that I've experienced is truth for you too. Does that make sense? Like, I think that there is space there where I can learn from those experiences, even though it's not my reality and it can be your reality. You know what I mean? There's this crossroads there that I think can be peaceful and hopeful and not necessarily require accommodation. You know what I'm saying?
I think my final takeaway, if I'm going to sum all this up, and again, it's not going to be a universal answer. I don't think you can apply this across the board, but just in this conversation with you right now, I think my takeaway, if I had to sum it up, would be perspective is not. I'm going to say is not reality. It's more of like a doorway. And the more doorways we open up and we walk through, the bigger and the richer, I guess, our reality becomes. I think to me that's more of what this is meaning now, not so much that I think there's opportunity as I'm sitting here thinking, I think there's opportunity for all of us to broaden that and to make our reality a little bit bigger when we allow different perspectives in. But I'm going to be very careful to say that I don't think it's actually reality. I think it's just a way of you to see the world with bigger eyes, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and I think it definitely it gives me cause for self-reflection when I approach something very black and white. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. When I can stop and think, okay, that's your perception of things, and I have to accept that that is your perception of things. I also think that um, it helps me be open to hear from other people when I can accept that I don't have to put input into that unless I'm invited to. You know what I mean? Like, you can have your perception. That is absolutely okay. If you're asking me, this is my perception. If you're not asking me, it's okay. That's your perception. And perception, I love that. That is something new though for me, that definition between, I don't know if it's new. I feel like we've talked about that before, like perception and what perspective.
Perspective.
But that's a really good reminder for me to remember that perception piece is immediate and the perspective piece is like 2020, right? Like, that gives you the space to really rethink those things and put it in its place. So it's good.
Well, and where, final thought for me, when we start having those fundamental truths that come in, right? And some people don't hold those truths to be actual truths, but that shapes even our perspective and what we allow to come in to even alter our reality. I think that's where people struggle to have that common ground. Like what you're saying, Jamie, you can have your reality and I can have mine. I think the rub comes, and I'm putting myself in that spot for a second, but I know there's fundamental truths, and that also, like, that shapes that reality. And so it doesn't bend. There's some areas in my life that it just cannot be bent. And that's what makes it kind of difficult when you're talking about perspectives and trying to grow your own personal reality because of those truths that you come in. I think it's interesting, even from, our conversations of how people can take those fundamental truths, and sometimes people don't believe them to be truths themselves, or they even see those a little bit differently. And I think that's where I personally struggle with conversations and trying to find common ground, but that's outside of this myth that we're trying to bust.
Yes.
So.
I don't know if we busted a myth or if we confirmed a myth or what we just did, but I have some new food for thought that I get to take.
Throwback.
Did I get? We're going to trend that again. Food for thought, everyone. Hashtag food for thought. Just kidding. But no, I do have some. I have some things to think about. I love that. So thank you for that.
Well, we are also going to work on trying to make this smaller because, again, this is only supposed to be introductory to a myth that people have and then us talk about it. Of course, we are very long-winded, Jamie. So
You know
here
what?
I'm looking.
What do you do when you learn new things at the same time as you're just exploring things? It's what we do. It's what we do.
Yes. I do. We'll go ahead and conclude our little intro here. I hope everybody is going to stick around, enjoy part 2 of Trauma with Dave. It was a great conversation. And like I said in part 1, we had so much fun just talking with him that we looked at it when we were done. We're like, oop, this has to be a 2-parter now because there's just too much. So
I feel like we have we might have a couple more coming up like that, but
I'm
it's
sure
good stuff. So
a couple more. That's probably going to be most of what we know. I'm just kidding. So yeah, with that, I'm going to say goodbye and I'm going to say enjoy the episode. And I will talk to you later, Jamie.
All right. Have a great week. Can we shift a little bit? I'm curious. Okay, so we've talked about like trauma, trying to define a little bit about what traumatic events might look like or what they are. What about, is that, I feel like we would be doing a disservice if we didn't talk a little bit about like PTSD, because I think that's another catchphrase. It's like, oh, I'm so triggered, or I have PTSD from things that really aren't it. It's kind of part of language now. Like it's part of what's,
Yep.
you know. So can you talk a little bit about the difference between, hey, I had some traumatic events as a child or as a young adult, and I've dealt with those, or they didn't affect me like someone else thinks it should, to PTSD, which probably is a little more clinically definable, and what that might look like and triggering and some of those things.
Good question. Sometimes, depending on your clinician, some folks will look at trauma experience, especially if it's impairing normal daily functioning on a significant level, to where, we have folks who aren't able to get out of their house, or they see a spider and they freak out a lot more than what a normal person would do, to where, okay, we can classify it as a post-traumatic stress disorder. I can say as a clinician that I tend to, because of the vernacular, because of how our culture is around being very flippant with that right now, in my humble opinion, and not taking away from anybody's trauma experience and post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis, but sometimes it's just thrown out there so fast, and it could be more than that. We can have a generalized anxiety disorder. We can have a dissociative, we can have all sorts of things going on concurrently at the same time, and not necessarily have trauma or post-traumatic after the trauma. So sometimes a lot of life is full of trauma, but when it comes to the actual diagnosis, I tend to send folks for a full psychological assessment with a psychologist before I'll throw that out there on a diagnosis. And as a clinician in our state, we can give diagnosis, but I tend to not go there a whole lot. There's personal preference in that as well. Sometimes I don't want people to be a label.
Mm-hmm.
They have their experience. I want them to have that experience and understand it, certainly, and learn how to cope with it, and how to not respond so harshly when things happen.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, there's post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis. I tend to put that in an area where it's like significant trauma response. Normal daily function is impaired on different levels. It could be socially, emotionally blunting, physical aggression, reckless behavior, outrageous reckless behavior, different things like that are not normal responses or normal ways to cope with stress.
Well, and this might speak to some of the questions Malin and I had talked about too, but once you have PTSD, do you always have PTSD?
Good question. Um, I, in my clinical experience, I would say no, not
So,
necessarily, because you can get to a point to where you can process through that trauma and not have it be such an impairment on your normal daily functioning to where you no longer meet the clinical criteria for having that diagnosis.
mm,
And they're doing all sorts of cutting edge treatments on this, microdosing and things like that. I don't know if anybody has heard about that. There's some of that. There's some clinicians in our area that are getting certified to do microdosing where they help people take acid basically and work through. It's a microdose of it, so it's not like it's full blown 70s. Here we go again kind of thing.
hmm
But
well, and that
yeah,
probably has a similar effect to the reprocessing processes, is what I was imagining. I've read a little bit about it. I don't know a ton about it, but the idea that you can reprocess those memories, add information, help organize it differently to better understand what happened to you rather than living
absolutely.
in that same mindset. And so that's fascinating.
Yeah,
It's
it is.
fascinating.
And I think of, I keep going back to the brain. I don't know why that is. But what's wired together fires together. So when you have trauma experiences, kind of think of it as a metaphor of going to the file cabinet, pulling open the drawer, looking for trauma. You pull out the trauma folder to put new trauma in, and what's the first thing you see is all your old traumas. So
Yeah.
then it's like, oh.
Yeah.
Before you close up that folder and put it back in the drawer and close it, you've immediately opened up a whole garden full of trauma experience, and that usually is something that complicates folks as well if they're already kind of in survival mode and you
hmm
you have that going on. It's like, oh goodness, okay, what's wired together fires together. That's something I use quite a bit with folks and trying to normalize their experience, get the self-acceptance up, positive self-talk, and then we're trying to change that narrative a little bit about you were you know, third grade getting bullied. You're not third grade anymore.
hmm
Okay. There's some other things that are different. Can you help me understand what else is different?
I feel
You
like
know,
that is a huge part, Malin, of what you and I were talking about is that, that there is some self responsibility in processing, dealing with, coping with, and learning tools to move forward from traumatic events, that I think that's um I think that's a message that it took me a while to hear that message too, that I have some responsibility. I am not controlled by that. I can control what happens to me and how I respond to that. And that took some time to figure out. So those are the spaces I think, and that is a difficult space. How do we as people who have people around us that may have experienced trauma, that may get upset with us because we don't respond to their trauma in the way that they need us to or whatever. How do we as people support those that we love that are maybe experiencing some of this?
oh, that's a good one. It depends on the situation, certainly. I tend to encourage a lot of patience and a lot of self awareness so that you're not inflicting your this is how you got to respond. And if you don't respond, if you don't go to a funeral and you don't cry, you don't care. Where's that written that because someone doesn't cry, they don't care? That doesn't equate. And it's like some people go to a funeral, which is ultimately a celebration of life, and they might smile, they might laugh, they might remember some of those good memories. And goodness knows when I'm no longer living, I hope that people remember some of the good things. I want to have a celebration. I always said that my funeral's going to have the Looney Tunes. That's all, folks. At the end, I mean, it's just
That would be fitting.
perspective.
Fitting
It's so
day for
true.
you.
Anybody who knows me is like, yeah, I could still see that.
Oh,
But I don't know if I'm getting to what you're saying, but it is it's complicated. Everybody gets their own way, and so I think of validating someone for their experience, even if you don't agree with it, even if you think it's complete crap or that they're manipulating you so they can get more game time on their PlayStation or whatever the underlying motives might be, validating. That sounds terrible. I understand that. How can I help?
hmm
And when they come with they might not know what help they need, so that you might get that, I don't know, just do something, or God, you don't know, you don't care, and all these kinds of things that can really send a lot of us for a loop, because this is obviously somebody we care about. We vested in the relationship. So it's like, what does that look like?
hmm
Okay, what can I, I'm a behavioralist. I like the behavioral. I go there a lot with folks. Break it down. If I were a fly on the wall, how would I know? Love me. Okay. If I were a fly on the wall, looking in, seeing love take place, what does that look like?
Yeah. What do you need from me? I like
And,
that.
and that's the grounding part. That person that's struggling with their trauma, struggling with their PTSD. It's like, what does that look like? And I will tell folks, is like isolation one of the worst things you can do, because you're just going to be in your head. You're going to be alone with your thoughts, and this stinking thinking's going to come in. Sometimes they say idle hands is the devil's workshop. It's so true. They just sit in there and replay it, replay it, replay it. And what that does for the memory is it makes it that more pronounced. And if it's a distorted memory to begin with, now you got this distorted or inaccurate memory that's huge. That's all they think about all the time, and that's what they're living in.
Mhm.
And it's not accurate, and it doesn't need to be that way.
Yeah.
But you can't force that on it. You can't just like, stop it, just stop it. So a lot of times I'm
And
grounding techniques. I'm like deep breaths, an awareness, five senses, 4x4 breathing. You breathe in for 4, hold it for 4, out for 4, in for 4, kind of thing. Those kinds of things for me to decrease the risk of an adrenaline dump, because you get the adrenaline dump and then the thinking part of our brain gets hitchhiked by our need for survival, and then we do stupid stuff, or we say mean things, we do hurtful things, and then we add this other little mix in there when we get alcohol or drugs, because then all of a sudden people turn to that kind of stuff for, again, the immediate gratification, the immediate fix. You know what you get when you drink. You know how it affects your body. That becomes their friend. It's almost like their actual connection with society and with peers becomes the bottle, or whatever alcohol they're drinking, because
Yeah.
they know what they got. It's not going to hurt them. They don't see that hurt as hurt, because it's like, this is safer than the bully.
Right.
Let's go. I get acceptance. I feel 10 foot tall and bulletproof when I drink this stuff. And I'm thinking, it's, the middle school bullied kid that just wants to fit in. All of a sudden, he's Mr. Talkative because he's drunk or high.
Right. Right. It looked like you wanted to say something.
Sorry, man.
it's just, I hear a lot of this and it's like, yeah, okay. I mean, I just don't understand. No, I'm going to rephrase that. I just cannot believe that some of this stuff has to happen in order for progression. It's hard for me. So I'm just listening and drinking it in.
Well, and I don't know. I guess I don't know that it has to happen. I feel like that's, even as much as like trauma affects, things can affect people differently, sometimes traumatic and sometimes not. I think the way we heal through it's different too. I don't know that everyone needs the same things. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right. Sometimes, unfortunately, life is messy, and I'll have folks who will be through traumatic events that did impact them. They oppressed it. They just shoved it all in. Let's say they were, in military deployment. They just, that their task at hand, they had their mission, they were out there on it, and then they come back in the society and try to acclimate and have something else bad happen, and then they are able to talk about that, and that helps them by talking about what's happened with them since they've been, back in civilian life, let's say. It helps them be at peace about what happened when they were in deployment and some of that. So it's kind of, again, what's wired together fires together. It can really kind of leverage that, and it could help them go like, aha. And then in their brain, they're like, wait a second, that's kind of like that. What? Oh, haha. The light comes on and things are cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
You never know. Everybody is different.
Yeah. So there's a thing on our list because I tried to come up with some questions before we met, and one of the things I was hoping we can get to, and I'm just gonna throw it in there, is what is secondhand trauma? I've heard that term come up, and I don't think I understand what that means. I can read it and I can surmise what it means. I don't know if that's really what it's intended, but do you know what secondhand trauma is, Dave?
You know, I have my definition, but I'm kind of curious. Could you go there? Go there with me for a moment, would you? What how would you define that?
For me, if I read that the way it is, if I just read it as secondhand trauma, I would expect that somebody receives trauma from somebody else's traumatic event.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Jamie?
I was going to say I have an example for you. One of the things that I don't see, it's even hard for me to call it trauma, but one of the things that I learned from my mom's experiences, which were not mine. She was traumatized as she was younger. But one of the ways it kind of affected me in my parenting was this super overprotective, the world is dangerous and we have to save ourselves from everything. And so, a little bit of germophobia, a little bit of no, you can't go spend the night at people's houses because it's not safe. Lots of different ways that came out in parenting. And I think if I can go back, it's because I think those are the messages that I got from my mom's trauma. She was not safe in those spaces, and she made sure we were safe by not letting us in those spaces. Does that make sense?
Right. Absolutely. And I like the examples and the definition. I really do. I run into this a lot. I work with minority populations, first generation migrants and stuff like that, to where, the trauma is so significant for them that they place it onto their children because they don't want their children to risk the exposure to the trauma that they experienced. So they traumatize their kids inadvertently many times, but they don't want that bad stuff to happen to their kids. So I'll have adolescents that are in high school that have really never been out of their house except to go to school and back. They don't participate in social events. They don't go to the library. They don't go to the gym and work out. They don't do anything. And, then I'm educating this family as to you're teaching your kid kind of how to live a life that I don't know that you really want them to live. Because how are they going to figure some of this stuff out? And so then we're doing socialization activities. We're finding out with the library as we're taking a tour. And sometimes in clinician practice, I don't know if all clinicians do this. I've walked around Walmarts with people, to where there's people here, and they're not all talking about you, and they're not all to do you harm. They're doing them. They're just doing what they do. And I process through with them just to help them, again, change the narrative in their brain from that experience that they were shared from somebody else that they never actually experienced. It's like, you mean they're not going to try to kidnap me? No, you're 16 years old. If they kidnap you, they'll bring you back.
Yeah.
It's
So,
like, it's okay.
so by this conversation and Jamie, your examples, then to me, I would change my definition to say it's not trauma based off of somebody else's like trauma. It's being traumatized by an individual who has their actions were rooted in their own trauma. It would be
Potentially.
secondhand trauma.
I do have a friend who worked in law enforcement, and they told me about how the things that they experienced in that role, which had a lot to do with harm that was done to kids, really affected their own parenting too. So that would be an example of trauma that living through vicariously, right? Like that would be vicarious trauma, that these traumatic
That's
things
it.
happen to these other people, and it's affecting the way I'm now living my life because I've experienced these things vicariously. Secondary trauma, or what did you call it, Malin? I can't remember.
Secondhand trauma.
Secondhand trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even then, and I don't want to split hairs, but even for me, I'm like, I can see that being a little bit different just because I also have police friends that their whole personality changed because
Mm-hmm.
they went into the field one way and they left it another because they're like, I see the worst of humanity all the time. Well, I can almost say that's their firsthand experience that's causing trauma for them. Knowing, and this is going to be horrible, and I'm just going to use as an example, but like knowing that there is child abuse out in the world is different than having to go and see it firsthand or stop the parent from abusing a child because that's my job. To me, that could be, I could see where that's more of a direct impact to me being part of a trauma event that I can now say, wow, I had to witness that and I had to do something about it versus knowing that it exists and I never have to confront it. That's how I compartmentalize it. Is that it's like, well, I can still understand that as being someone's direct trauma for their job, but I get your point, Jamie. I mean, it's the whole way around it. It's just horrible, but it's just like when I first heard that term, I'm like, well, now it's like people taking credit for something that bad that happened for someone else. This is at least how I took it. Is now I get to claim that I am suffering from something because somebody else experienced it, and now I get to claim part of that as my own trauma. I don't understand that.
Well, there is, I mean, and Dave, you could probably talk even more about this, but there's like generational trauma too. That is a form of, if you think about, I'm curious how this will play out in the long run because of like the pandemic. Like, I wonder if that will be a generational trauma type event. But like for instance, people who lived through the Great Depression then had a hard time throwing things away, then teach their kids that everything has value and you can't throw things away. Add the psychological piece to that, then you have a next generation that's hoarders or something. You know what I mean? Like these kind
Right.
of things can grow and build over time because of something that happened generations ago. It can be like, I don't know, generational.
It's almost kind of part of their culture, if you
Yeah,
will, of that
yeah.
family. And I tell people is like they don't know what they don't know. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if that's the only way you've been raised, that's the way it is until you have something happen that makes you question it. You know, if you're, they didn't have episodes of hoarders when we were growing up, and now people are like, that's a problem. You know,
Right.
it's like that's a lot of stuff that they feel very emotionally connected to, and there's a lot of anxiety with having to get rid of any of that. They feel like they're disappointing someone, or I've had folks that they don't want to get rid of anything because it was part of an estate that was left to them from a loved one. And so then it's like, are you using it? Do you need it? You can't walk in your house right now. You're
Right.
living in a motel
Yeah.
Yeah,
because
but
your house is so full.
I do think there's an equality though there that I want to pick up that you were saying, Jamie, with that example
Hmm.
is between, let's say, the Great Depression and the pandemic that we just went through, and it makes me. And again, my point I hope is going to be understood. I don't want to fixate on how people did or didn't react to the pandemic or what they did to get through it, but I do think there's an element there. One of the distinctions that I can see is that the Great Depression happened to people. There was nothing by choice they could have done. It was just they had to weather the storm, and it took I can't remember the exact, was it a decade? It was a long time. It was a very prolonged period where people couldn't change their circumstances. They couldn't impact their circumstances. They literally had to just weather the storm. And when they came out the other end, they had all these new coping mechanisms and habits and things that they were doing to get them through that time period. So I could understand that's where I'm holding on to those a little bit longer. With the pandemic, it's almost like pick your adventure of how you went through that. And it was also a very small, in comparison, a very small period of time. And so when I see that, I'm like, yeah, but like we got to choose how we went through that pandemic to an extent. Like there were some things, even in my life, I was sent home. I could not go back into the office. Like that
Mm-hmm.
did happen to me for a period of time. That was the majority of the pandemic. But then there was things in there that I did get to choose, right? Like I did get to choose, did I wear a mask? Do I do 6 feet? Do I go to the store like I do normally and try to live my life the way that I wanted to? Or did I follow the guidelines? Did I go get the vaccine? Did I wear the mask? Did I do social distancing? And I think for me, that's a huge difference because I felt like I'd never been through the Great Depression, but if I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't impact my circumstance with the Great Depression, but I could impact my circumstances in the pandemic. So, Dave, is there an element to that when we're talking about trauma? Like, if you have a personal hand in the situation that would be the trauma event, do you, does that make sense? Is there some sort of impact to that if a person would think that is more traumatic or less traumatic?
Potentially. I'm like sitting there going, that a good question, because I'm sitting there thinking that it impacts everybody differently. I've had families, several families that during the pandemic lost um, just basic things happened during that time in our lives to where they lost a lot of loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had some that said, we didn't have any problem. What's the big deal? Why wear a face mask? I don't want to, and it's like, well, they're not going to let you into the building unless you have one on. Sorry, that's the rules that they established. The people who have that meeting space or that building, that's what they have. So, trauma on either side, significantly different. Same experience, same pandemic.
Not necessarily the same experience though, because I
Well,
think
it's
like
traumatic,
here,
but yeah.
I mean, we had school. School was out from March till May, and then we had our normal summer, and then school went back into session, right? But there were other places where they had school closed the whole next year.
Right.
So, when you think about the way that's affecting those kids specifically, it's different. But I do think, for instance, I there are still like some of my favorite TV shows will have like the COVID season, where they like were either after the pandemic or during the pandemic, they were recording what it would be like on the show for the pandemic. And I was watching one not too long ago, and it like, I don't know, it just struck something because it was a difficult time. It was a very isolative time for me and my family. And so, I had some emotions about that surprised me because we're 5 years out. It was not that, you know what I mean? Like it was a long time ago and it wasn't a huge
Right.
deal, but maybe it was a bigger deal than we know because we've just kind of pushed through it and fought through it, sometimes
Existed.
literally
Yep.
fought through it.
Well, and the most lasting effect that I can have about the pandemic is there was a period of time, roughly 18 months, that felt like only a couple months, right? Like I remember when we were just getting out of the pandemic, I remember thinking, oh, a couple months ago, and they're like, that was 18 months ago. So there was a gap of time that was like just gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even now, when I go and look back, I'm like, oh yeah, I only, I was with this company just for, just over a year. Well, no, I was with this company for over 3.5 years, but it was within that window of the pandemic. So then a lot of that time just was
Just
erased. But I know for me and my family, and for some other people that I talk to, we had a very different outcome or even worked through the pandemic because of the decisions and choices we made. And that also includes the external impacts too, right? Like there was some stores we couldn't and we could go to. And some of that was based off of our decisions. And there was some people that we could interact with and we couldn't interact with, again, based on our decisions. And I'm just going to say for Mahlon, for this guy, it made me feel more in control during that time. And so I personally would not look at that time period as a traumatic time. And I think mostly it's for me because I felt like I had the control that I needed to make decisions within that space. But for me, I can see where me losing that control would be a trauma trigger. Some people don't mind losing control. Some people don't mind being told what to do or where to go or how to act, and they're totally fine. You take that away from me, that's going to be a trauma event, and I'm going to fight that tooth and nail. So I understand there's a difference, but just in that example, Jamie, I was like, well, wait a minute. I think there's a clear distinction. And so I just want to know, is there something to that? Is there something to say when somebody feels like they have some control over the event that would cause trauma? Is that part of when somebody would recognize it as a trauma event, or is that does that have no bearing?
To me, I could see it being. I feel like I'm giving so many middle of the road answers because you're gonna have some folks that are gonna to be able to get through that, survive it, and be okay. You have some folks that I think in the pandemic, for example, is a sense of entitlement came from that. We already tended to have immediate gratification culture. We amplified that when you're allowed to say be most of your social interactions at the time, a lot of it anyway, was social media, and you get to say or do a lot of stuff that you might not say to people in person. Well, then some 18 months of pandemic posts, and we get through it, and then all of a sudden these folks are having to interact in the real world, and they're used to saying what they think and what they feel, and
It's
they don't really care.
I didn't even think of it, Dave, but I was talking to somebody the other day about how like people are so like I don't know, just I don't know if it's new, but just like rude to customer service people and some of that. And I bet instant gratification and we couldn't get sat in the restaurant when we thought we should be sat in the restaurant when there's nobody in there or they don't have toilet paper this week, that kind of thing. I didn't even think
Right?
of that as part of what came up with that. You know what I mean?
I'm sorry, but no toilet paper in the middle of a pandemic is more than
That,
instant gratification. I'm
right.
so
But,
sorry. That's like human need. I'm
well,
right
no.
there.
I mean, but
People are buying
imagine
cases of that. But yeah,
that
that we
literally.
don't use our bathtub anymore because it's stacked to the ceiling.
I
I'm
thought you were going to say for another reason.
oh
Right?
Go ahead, Jamie.
I'm going to if my family needs toilet paper and I can't get it, that is suddenly an emergency that causes all kinds of like stress. And I remember I literally have a deep freeze in my garage because of all of the things that were coming out about the possibility of shortages and disruptions in the food supply. Like, what am I going to do if I can't feed my kids? You know what I mean? And I've never experienced that before. Yeah,
Yeah.
ever. Was that ever a fear? I'm throwing 5 pounds of food a week away out of my fridge. And suddenly there's a possibility that I couldn't feed my kids. It was kind of scary.
Yeah.
And I hadn't even thought through some of that. So see, I think there is value in processing these things, my friend. But
Well,
um
there's value, but I don't know if everything needs to be processed.
well, that's true.
Um, One thing before we wrap up, because I know I'm looking at the clock, I'm just curious, and this this phrase triggers me every time Jamie uses it, and then I'm really starting to process and being like, okay, put on my big boy pants. What does this really mean? Because at first, when I heard this word, and I wonder if Jamie knows where I'm going, I heard this word as Mahlon needs to respond in a way, and Mahlon has to believe that the trauma is there to the same extent, and that's not true. And so, do you know where I'm going, Jamie?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I don't want to
Can we
steal your
dive
thunder.
can we dive in just a little bit on what does it mean to be trauma informed and why is that so important? Because that is a struggle that I have, and I will be honest, when Jamie and I have our conversations specifically around trauma, when that word or phrase comes out, it just makes my hair on the back of my neck just stand up, and I'm like, okay, I don't need to be an unwilling participant in your trauma event. Like, I just don't need that. And when I really kind of stopped and thought about it, it's like, okay, some awareness would be okay for me. I think some awareness of some of that could be. And so then I had to start kind of like backing off of that a little bit. But I thought it would be a good point to bring up with you, Dave, is, what does that really mean to be trauma informed? And why is it important?
Good question. And Jamie could probably speak to this just as well as I can from being in human services as long as she's had. Trauma informed is just basic. And I'm trying to think I'm going to do it injustice, but to me, it means like having an awareness of other people's experience within your own framework. So their trauma is their trauma, and understanding that, recognizing that, and not having it be part of your experience, but yet being there for them to be the sympathetic, the kind of like it's going to be okay, because trauma again is often laden with a lot of feelings and emotions. The thing with feelings and emotions is they don't last forever. They change quite readily. So let's help them get through the moment. Sometimes I'll say win the minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, and doing some of that stuff to help them through. So I think of informed as just a deeper awareness of people's experience. But Jamie, you probably do a lot more like textbook definitions.
Oh goodness, no. Well, and I think that through this process with Mahlon and I, and this is really us just presenting to the world some of the I guess work we've done together as we try to build a bridge over this, right? And try to bring some awareness to it, and also give grace in spaces where maybe there is an awareness. But I don't lay a ton of burden on Walmart for having a trauma-informed environment, right? Like, I don't expect Walmart to walk through and be like, oh, maybe this on the end cap is going to be triggering to someone who experienced this. So let's put it in the middle of this aisle on this corner. That's not their job. But I think when you're working in spaces with lots of people who are presenting themselves because they're struggling, because they have difficulties, and because they need help, those are the spaces that really do need to be trauma informed. And so for me, in my work specifically, and of course this just bleeds into my life because I think that's just how I'm wired or something, but I'm always trying to look for those spaces where we can make a safe space for people to come and heal. I want it to be an inviting environment that people can feel safe and build trust in a space where they can explore what they need to be well and to build the skills and the tools that they can respond appropriately. So, I think looking at the circles that you're in and the spaces that you're in, I think it's great for a church to think about a trauma-informed environment and a trauma-informed space for people, because hurt people are seeking healing, and that would be a space where people could go for healing. But maybe not the insurance company's office. You know what I mean? That may not be the place. So I'm a big proponent, and this is softened, I think, Mahlon, in that you do what you can in the spaces that you can, because we want to be good people, but that doesn't mean that it's our responsibility to fix someone else's trauma either. You know what I mean? There's a balance there, I think.
Yeah. Depending on how emotionally invested you are in that other person.
Yeah.
Because, that's easier said than done if it's a stranger at Walmart versus it's your partner and you're wanting to help them in any way you can to help salvage a relationship and you don't know what to do.
Absolutely.
So,
well, and I do think part of that comes from just understanding that sometimes people's responses are involuntary. You know what I mean? That it's they may be responding out of something that's hurt them rather than a rational space that is because of something I've said or done, right? So I think that's an important piece of it too. But
Yeah. That little internal dialogue that you can have is like, is this a me problem or a them problem? Have I said something wrong? Is my face got that look?
my
What's going on?
no, my supervisor all the time used to tell me, Jamie, it's not about you. You're just not that special. Like stop taking
Yeah.
the responsibility for it. It's not about you. And it's
But I
certainly
want
I
to
did
help
something.
them. They need some help. I'm here to help them.
How did I
Yes.
fail you today? Yes, this is a thing for me sometimes, but
Well, and one of the things that we've talked about, just as a final thought for me, is, and I think this kind of sums it up, where I'm challenging trauma, and I'm challenging the the culture that we live in now, where it does feel like every time you turn around, there's somebody crying, oh, that's traumatic, that's trauma, that's this, that's that. Is if that's, I think you've said this in the past, Jamie, if that's all you look for, that's all you're going to find. And so for me, my final thought on all this is not everything is trauma. Not, every time that somebody thinks that there's trauma going on, does that mean there's always trauma? But I also think there's opportunities for someone like me and others to say, don't just discount people or situations because they're using the trigger word or the trauma
word.
go-to word right now.
Yeah.
I think there's opportunity for people like me to say, okay, I'm going to listen for what I can, and then discard the rest. And hopefully that's enough for the person on the other end to realize that I'm trying to care as much as I can. But not everything is a trauma.
yeah.
It's kind of where I'm at right now.
And that brings me to, I guess, my final question for you, Dave, is we've talked a lot about trauma from a observer's point of view, right? Like this is what I'm seeing as a removed person. I would love for you to tell us maybe a little bit about what might be things that we need to look for in ourselves if we need to get help. Maybe, if something seems to be triggering us, or maybe I think there are people who are scrolling the TikToks that find a TikTok that's like, oh gosh, wait a second, I experienced that. And I do that because of that. You know what I mean? Maybe it is that aha moment for them to say, maybe that affected me more than I thought it did. What are some signs and symptoms that might say, hey, you should probably reach out for some professional help or seek some support?
I good question, certainly. I think of changes in personality, maybe sleep disruption, diet irregularity, things that, it's going to be, to me, it could be mass, like, oh, I'm just a little sad, I'm a little depressed. Well, you haven't been out of the house for a month, and you're constantly on alert that somebody is going to come by and harm you in some way, but the pillars of good mental health, diet, sleep, exercise, if there's a change in any of those, if there is the people that you do connect with are constantly questioning, like, are you okay? Are you okay? Instead of like flipping out on them and like, why do you keep asking me? Sit there and say, are they on to something? Is there something going on that I don't see? I am not myself. I sometimes will tell patients, clients that I see, is like, are you living your legacy? Are you living every day like how you want to be remembered? Because if you're not, then that could be a problem for you.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're no longer that person that you strive to be. If you're a helper and all of a sudden you're like wanting to yell at kids, for example, as a teacher, you did not get into the teaching profession, I am almost certain, so you could yell at kids and belittle them and basically be their bully.
Right.
So it's things that are normal stuff, is taking a break, self-care. It's going to look sometimes like depression or anxiety, and sometimes, again, the ladle of feeling that gets drugged through with trauma. It's it could be anything. It could be more risky behavior. All of a sudden, you feel like jumping out of perfectly good airplanes for fun. Whatever, if that's not your thing and all of a sudden it is, that there could be something to that.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of, judging yourself, take the time, don't hide, don't run from yourself. And in particular, when I think of that, I think of, drugs and alcohol, because some people don't like how they feel. They know how they'll feel with the drugs or the alcohol, so they'll go there. And that's easier. Then I don't have to see a shrink. I don't have to own up to any problems. It's just a few drinks. It's okay. And whatever justifications to get utilized for that. And it's like, no, not good. Especially if you're a young person and you're developing, again, not using it, you're losing it. There's so much research, and more research is coming out all the time with the legalization of marijuana. We could talk all day on that one too, that it's kind of like, hold up. If you notice that your brain's in a fog, you're not thinking as clearly. Things that used to be very, pleasurable, or things that you look forward to, you don't.
Mm-hmm. That's a good list. I wasn't sure they still called therapists shrinks, though.
Oh, I
Is that a thing?
Called so many names, you have no idea. Sorry.
Good guy. That's the name.
Yeah, that's it. Don't therapize me. 'Cause I don't know. I didn't know that was a word, but apparently that's a word. I've never Googled it. Therapizing.
Oh, yeah, that's a thing. For sure. I think I've said that before, but no, I just want to thank you for hopping on, Dave. This has been such a great conversation. And I think bringing some good awareness to the topic is good. It's a hot topic. And so, to dig into the real meat of it is awesome. So just want to thank you for hopping on. And
thanks for the opportunity. I do appreciate you guys taking time and letting somebody like me share experience and what I know. I'm not a guru by any stretch of imagination.
It was a fun conversation, so I appreciate it.
I think we might have opportunity to have you hop on again. So we appreciate it. We'll keep you on the phone list for sure. So
very well. Thank you.
Yes. Well, we would just like to thank you all for joining us for this episode of Roundtable Mindset. It's been fun, and we will plan to see you all next time around the roundtable. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.